Hey, what's up, everyone? I hope you're doing awesome. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what I think some of the most important interview questions in facility management are. These are questions that I've been asked in the past. I would tell you that these are some of the most important questions that you're going to be asked potentially in your interviews in any facility management role. Now, it's important to note that there are so many different industries within the facility management category. You can be a facility manager for a hotel. You can be a facility manager for a commercial space. You can be doing industrial, light industrial, plant management, a kind of a hybrid of different things. You can be a community manager. You can be a property manager. The word is interchanged through so many different industries. So just take note of that. And so much of your interview questions are going to be based on the specific industry that you're going to be interviewing on. So for this video, I'm going to be focusing on a cross between the hotel side and then your standard commercial facility manager. So that's what that's where a lot of the origins of these questions are going to come from, and I'm excited to hop right into it. So as you continue to evolve in your career, you're going to find that the questions are geared more towards the soft skills than they are the technical skills of your job. So perhaps if you're interviewing as a facility manager for a company that has a smaller footprint, maybe a smaller organization, it's going to be more technical side. As soon as you start to manage a group of people or assets that just continue to grow up and go up in value, it's going to go and gravitate more towards the soft skills. So your project management, time management, communication, leadership, conflict resolution, what's your ability to do for decision making, critical thinking, openness to feedback, progress, things of that nature. So bear that in mind as well. And it's going to be less focused on the technical side of things, wondering, not so much asking you about how do you wire a three-way switch, or tell me the difference between single phase, three phase, 208, 480, so on and so forth. It's going to be geared a lot differently. So be prepared depending on what role you're interviewing for those different types of questions. So it's important to have a very thorough understanding of the company that you're interviewing for or with, and have a really good understanding of their goals, objectives, and then what their key qualifications for someone in that role are going to be. Now, the interview is going to be largely based on the job posting, so whatever the application you applied for or the job description you had, there's a good chance that a lot of the questions are going to be based around that. So you're already going to have a pretty good understanding as to what you're going into if you have read that job posting thoroughly. There shouldn't be many surprises. So before we go into the actual questions, there's some things that you may not even be aware of that you're being judged on, and there's a lot of hidden criteria that are within the interview process before it even begins. I'll give you a couple really good examples. So years ago, we brought a candidate to one of our restaurants, and it was a restaurant that the company owned. It had a full-service restaurant, and the intention was to see how well the candidate did when they encountered issues with their order. So before we even got into the restaurant, we told the head chef that we were going to place an order, and that the server for our table was going to take the order and they were going to get it wrong. And we were going to see how that individual responded and reacted to having their order be brought to them wrong, and how they treated the server, just their overall interaction, how it affected them during the meal, in addition to their attitude, just an overall assessment. Just their character assessment, just a kind of an evaluation, right? A battle-tested, we're going to encounter issues, how do you deal with it, how do you cope with it, right? And that was in addition to the interview. So something you need to take note of is that the second you walk in the door for an interview, regardless of the company, you are being tested. You're being tested for everything: interaction, greeting, any circumstance or unusual that might come up. View it as an opportunity for you to present yourself in a really good manner. The second example is, and a lot of times candidates are offered a beverage, maybe a coffee, a drink, a water, and then they're also judged on that entire process. So if you go into a room and you're offered a cup of coffee, And after you're done with your coffee, if you decide to leave it on the table and you don't offer to take it to the sink, wash it, and put it in the dishwasher, you could very well be disqualified just for not seeing things through or wanting to follow up. So be very careful on everything that's going on during the interview, because you are being judged on it 100%. This is not uncommon to the facility management world, but a very common question is, tell me about yourself. And there are a million different ways to answer this. There's probably a million different YouTube videos out there describing this. From a facility management perspective, I can tell you that the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to answer it very chronological and master brevity. So if somebody asks you this question, tell me about yourself, you can say, well, I've been in the facility management world for 7 years. I first started out working for X company, right? And just list everything off of your resume and follow up going chronologically, and end with your most recent job, and make it relevant, and then say, and that is what brings me here today. That is really simple. It shouldn't take you more than 45 seconds to answer. If it does, you need to rehearse this before you even go interview. Secondly, as I mentioned, the people that are here, depending on your role, if you're managing a team, people are a lot less concerned about your technical skills and more concerned about your management skills. So oftentimes after the first question of tell me about yourself, they follow up with, what does your typical day look like? And they're going to want to know, how many hours, what percentage of time do you spend in the office versus in the field? And I will tell you that the higher up you go and the more people you manage, the ratio better start to dwindle down, and it better look something along the lines of, 15% of the time I'm in the field, 85% of the time I'm in the office, right? You're doing reports, crunching numbers, doing data, scheduling vendors, following up on things, meeting with different departments, doing coaching, evaluations. There's a lot of managerial aspects that you're going to be doing depending on your role. But make sure you have whatever your current time split is down, and make sure that it's relevant to the company you're applying for. Again, if you're applying for a facility manager in a small hotel that has 35 rooms and you're telling people that you're spending 85% of your day on your desk, chances are you're not going to be asked to come back. So make sure that whatever position you're applying for, that it's relevant, and that the information you're giving them is tied to what was posted in the job description. I'm not telling you to embellish. I'm not telling you to lie. I'm saying that if it is relevant and applicable, just make sure your ratios correspond to that. So after they ask you about your typical day, you're going to want to run through and just say, well, depending on the day, this is how I prioritize things. And something to keep in mind is that during your stories, your goal is to cover a lot of the details so that they don't have to ask you these traditional questions down the line. So that I've oftentimes had interviewers tell me that, well, hey, great, thank you so much for answering that question. You've also answered a handful of other ones I was going to ask you, so thanks for bringing up those details. So when you tell them about your typical day, you can say, hey, my day starts out coming into the morning, recapping on what happened the day before. From there, I'll sit down, debrief with my team. We'll have a quick stand-up meeting, outline what's happening for the day. We'll go over our agenda, see if there's any emergencies that we need to address. From there, we typically go on to preventative maintenance. After we're working on our preventative maintenance, we'll then look at special projects, Another question that I've often been asked, and I've asked to others, is tell me about your budgeting experience. Do you have any experience forecasting, modeling, cost accounting? What does your capital expenditure process look like? Do you manage your own payroll? Do you what is the payroll? Do you have an operations and maintenance budget? A lot of times they will ask you very specific questions regarding utilities. They'll say, tell me about your typical utility costs and what do you do to control them? Have you noticed anything going on, right? They want to know that you understand your facility in numbers. And I've said this numerous times in other videos, that if you don't know your job well enough in numbers, you don't know your job. And so they're going to drill down on specifics in budgets, what you've done in the past, how you've managed construction costs, how you've managed capital expenditures, how you've managed utilities, what utilities have been your biggest expenses, so on and so forth. They're also going to ask you about labor, overtime, projects, any unforeseen maintenance schedules, fees, overages. They're also going to ask you about your management style, and they're going to say, if you do have a team, tell me how what is your management style? How would you describe it? And again, be your authentic self, but also be very aware of the type of company you're applying for. If they're going to ask you what's your management style, and you say, oh, I'm a live and let live, or hey, I'm a real bulldog, and my goal is to just work every dollar I can out of these people. I mean, both of those may be who you are, but just be very cognizant of the story that you're telling, because everybody has those times where they can be the relaxed manager, but everyone also has those times where it's crunch time and you need to get things done. So make sure that when you're explaining who you are and what your leadership style is, I would say something along the lines of, look, my leadership style is a one team, one fight. I'm not above anything. I'm looking to get the best job done with the best idea. I'm open to all sorts of feedback. If there are others on my team that have a better way of doing something, I'm always open to try it, because my goal is to improve the operations and efficiency of this department. If they haven't asked you this question already, there's a very high likelihood that they are going to ask you about how you spend your time, and they could say, tell me about the office time versus field time, and what would you say your percentage is, and why do you split it up that way? And again, depending on the company you're applying for, your role may vary. So if you can say a lot of different things, you can answer that you first started out working in the field and that your office time was 90% in the field, 10% in the office. But as you continue to grow your career and the needs changed, you've learned that the money for the company is made and saved in the office, and you found ways to duplicate yourself, whether that's through training, vendors, employees, and that you've been able to better evaluate your numbers and stay focused on the budget, so on and so forth. They're also going to ask you about KPIs, and for those of you who don't know what KPIs are, I think regardless of the size of the company you're interviewing for, they're still going to want to know some key performance indicators. So key performance indicators, metrics, what is your cost per square foot, what is your labor, your average labor, it can be the average room call, how long is your average room call taken, what is your average room call, how many work orders do you do, what are your targets, what is your utility consumption per square foot, per square meter. The list kind of goes on, but just look up KPIs and figure out what they are for your specific industry and make sure that you do know those numbers. The good news is, if you have access to finance and some bills and you know the square footage of certain areas, it's very easy to do these calculations, and they prove to be pretty helpful overall. Some KPIs nowadays are focused on energy consumption, CO2 footprints, and they want to know like your waste, right? So if you can talk about everything from your energy consumption per square foot, square meter, down to the cubic yards of trash that you're producing, you're going to come across as someone who is very thorough, detailed, and is very involved in day-to-day operations. So that's always a great thing. They're also going to ask you about technology, CMMS. Again, CMMS, Computerized Maintenance Management Software. There's a handful of different ones. There's CAFM, Computer Aided Facility Management. There's EAM, Enterprise Asset Management. There's IWMS, Integrated Workplace Management Software. All of these are synonymous with one another, and it's essentially a software program that allows you to track work orders, to do spatial planning, to do asset tracking, asset management, and they're going to want to know some details about it. What have you used? How do you use it? How does it integrate into your day? How do you dictate your day? So on and so forth. They're also going to ask you about crisis management. Nowadays, with everything that's been going on, ERPs are becoming a really hot topic. For those of you who don't know, ERP is an emergency response plan, and it kind of ties into EHS along with crisis management. So ensuring you can speak intelligently and with knowledge about your emergency response plans, whether that's we have a power outage, whether that's someone stuck in an elevator, that's flooding of the pool, someone's been shocked through electrical work, fire on property, dealing with facility management. There's almost an endless list of ERPs that you're going to need to develop. So this is also a good time to dovetail how you've written SOPs, how you do training, and how you ensure that everybody goes home safe every day and that safety is your number one priority. They're also going to ask you about your vendor management process and how you hire vendors, how you evaluate vendors, why do you use the current vendors that you use, have you ever had any issues with vendors? Tell me about a time when you've had to terminate vendors. Why did you do it? Have you had to switch them? Do you have a vendor management packet? Is there an approved vendor list, also known as an AVL? What are the requirements? Do you require them to be licensed, insured? Have you had them add you on their COI, which for those of you who don't know, COI is Certificate of Insurance. But they're going to want to know all about your vendor process. They're also going to ask you, if you are hired, tell me, what do you do here in your first 90 days? What does your first 90 days look like? And if it were me, I would answer it something along the lines of, during my first 90 days, my goal is not to come in and shake up the entire process. You have obviously been doing a lot of things right. My goal is to keep the momentum of what's been working, and reevaluate the processes. I'm a data-driven individual who, after looking at budgets and understanding the metrics and why you do what you do, understanding where you're spending your time, work orders, what you're spending your money on, I would then start to reevaluate and make recommendations. But again, my goal is to learn what you're doing, why you're doing it, not come in trying to change the world on day one. Really learn about your team, learn the dynamics, learn the kind of social atmosphere that you're walking into, and gain better understanding as to the company as a whole, and that you're going to be able to make a lot of really great changes within those first 90 days, but your first goal is to learn everything you can about your department and that company. And again, reviewing budgets, reviewing vendors, reviewing programs, policies, SOPs, department interactions, and so on. They're also going to ask you about your disciplinary style. How have you managed underperforming team members? Have you ever had to fire anybody? Tell me about that experience. What did you learn from it? Just be ready to share an example. If it were me, how I would answer that would be something like, it's always a little disheartening to work with underperformers, and so I've certainly had to fire people in the past. I've never actually felt good about letting anybody go. And regarding performance, the biggest thing I can do is give people the opportunity to change and let them know I am on their side, that I do want the best for them, because we only are better as a team. We don't want to let somebody go that has a lot of internal knowledge about the property and the operations, especially if it just comes down to the technical aspect of things. So I would put somebody on a performance improvement plan and make sure that we worked through something. And if at the end of it they decided that it's not something they're interested in, I would gracefully help them transition out of the company so that we can leave with our heads high and amicably. Now, depending on your role, again, they're also going to ask you about your willingness to perform certain labor tasks. So although you're the department head, they're going to ask you about examples of, hey, it's 2 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, we get a no heat call from some of our guests in the hotel, or there's a flood on property, some emergency that happens. How would you handle it? Right? And just say, hey, being in the facility management role, this is something that I've grown accustomed to. It comes along with the job. I fully embrace that. I enjoy it. So in the event I get a call early in the morning, if I do have a team set up, so let's say You have staff on site, right? You'll have developed SOPs. You'll always have them call you. You'll have them bring in. You'll also provide a list of contacts to reach out to emergency vendors that are after hours. And then depending on the circumstance and if your team warrants it, like, you are more than happy to come in. And just be prepared to give that example. They're also going to ask you really key specific ways that you have saved operational cost, expenses, construction costs, reduced energy, special projects, what you've done, how you've done it, and what would you do in their facility and how would you do it. One of the things that I would do with any company, and I would answer that by saying, again, I'm a data-driven person. I don't do things at random. I would employ your computerized maintenance management software, whatever that looked like. And from there, I would pull a list of data and I would say, show me the top. I would say, pull a list of all the work orders you've done for the last year. Let's say it's 1,000. I would then take those top 10 and I would say, how do I take these top 10 issues and how do I cut them in half by 50%? And they're going to ask you, what do you do in a typical day? Why do you prioritize it the way you do? And can you walk me through that process? And I would answer that by saying, here's how a typical day, my typical day is prioritized. In the event any emergency comes up, that takes precedence over anything that's happening. Because your number one goal is life safety and having a safe work environment. Number two, I would say, would be your operations, your day-to-day operations, whether that's running room calls, whether that's preventative maintenance, just your typical operating day-to-day. Third, I would say, would be special projects, anything that's going on, working with vendors. Maybe we have some third-party things that are happening, depending on that. Just a list of a couple questions that you're probably going to want to be prepared for. I'm not sure if they're going to come up, and hopefully during all these questions, you're able to give some pretty specific examples and very detailed stories as to why, and answer all their questions in detail so that they don't have to ask a lot of follow-up questions. So some questions that are probably going to come up are, how do you define quality? Why did you choose to be in the facility management role? Why are you interested in this position? Why do you want to leave your current position? What salary range are you looking for? That's a tricky one, all right? Nobody can ask you your salary anymore, so they'll ask you, what type of salary range are you expecting? So how do you answer that? Well, again, you should have a range and you should know what you're looking for in a new role. So let's just say that you don't want to blow them out of the water. You would just say, look, I've done my research and I would say that the comparable wage set for whatever your range is, but I'm sure that it's there. They're also going to ask you, tell me about a time you've had to meet tight deadlines. Tell me about sometimes you've had to deal with conflict at work. How do you deal with multiple different departments and their prioritizing? How do you handle workloads? There are so many questions, but I think what I really wanted to cover today were some of the key ones that I've been asked and the more difficult ones to answer, because it's more determining your management style, defining your management style, and giving them an insight as to the way that you operate. I once asked a friend of mine why he didn't promote a certain individual at his work, and he said that the number one reason the person didn't become a manager was because they were too inconsistent with their behavior and they let the day affect everything that they did. So if something bad happened to them that day, their attitude would tank right along with it. If something great happened that day, everything was, rainbows, milk, and honey. So making sure that regardless of what happens as the department leader, you need to be that cool, calm, collected, driving force behind your department that looks like is very calm going on. You're confident in what's happening, and you can portray that because you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. You have enough systems in place that when things do go wrong, because we all know in this industry, things go wrong every single day. Everything goes wrong in every single day. It's just a question of what's the order of magnitude, right? Is it 1x a bad day? Is it 5x a bad day? But making sure you know how you're going to handle these situations and interact with your department, interact with vendors, interact with ownership, whoever your key group of people are. They just want to know that they're bringing someone on board who's not only confident, competent, but has the skill set and mindset to back it up. I've often said that it's mindset before skill set, because as long as you have a good attitude, you're willing to put your ego aside, and that you're ready to accept constructive feedback or criticism, as they call it, and then you also have the best intentions for your department and the company. That is going to be number one. Skill set can always be taught, so making sure that you have the right mindset before going into anything is going to be key. So if there's anything else I can think of, I will certainly put it out there for you, but I hope this helps you prepare for any interview that you have coming up. Be sure that if there's anything else I can think of, I'll make sure to follow up with a second video. But until then, please like, subscribe, share, and make sure you have a great interview, and be great.